out working on the dahlia tubers. When I say we, I really mean Aaron. I've been working on some wedding floral stuff, and we're actually working in the garage together. I'm doing wedding florals, he's working on the dahlia tubers, and here is what we do with our tubers and why we do it. I am sure that you have heard lots of different ways to take care of your dahlias, to leave them in the ground, to take them out of the ground. And this is where it's really important for you to make a determination as to what is the microclimate that your yard is, because every yard is different. Every patch of soil, even the soil on the back side of our property as opposed to the soil on the front side of our property, is different. And so we're going to help you decide what you should do with your dahlias. So first, here is why we dig our dahlias. We take the whole clump out of the ground. Aaron used a pitchfork. He put on his all of his rain gear because it's wet and cold, and used a pitchfork to lift them up out of the soil. Our soil is it's like really full of clay. And so when these clumps come out of the ground, they are just covered in mud. What do you say?
Yeah, they're pretty much coated in mud.
So we have to make sure that they don't stay in the ground for that main reason, because if they stay in the ground, they're going to be way too wet throughout the winter, which will make them rot. The reason that we spray them off and clean them really good is so all of that moisture, all that wet dirt gets off of the tuber, mainly in between. When you spray yours off, if yours are coated in like thick mud type dirt, make sure to get it really good in between. See how you can like see through and in between the tubers now? That's what you want. Sometimes in the past, we were learning best practices for this. Mud clumps or dirt clumps stayed in between all those tubers, and through the winter season in storage, it ends up rotting that core in there, which you really need. We'll talk about that later, but you want to make sure that this tuber clump is clean and that it has a chance to dry. If your soil is really like sandy and it just pretty much comes right off of it really easily, then dust it off really good and then set it out to dry. So we dig our dahlias because we don't want them to rot. If your soil is really damp, stays really wet through the winter, you probably want to dig yours if you want to guarantee or ensure that you can give them the best environment to make it through the winter time. The other reason that you will want to dig yours is if your soil freezes really, really hard. The dahlias, if they freeze or they're too wet, it basically kills the tuber clump. So the reason to dig them is that you're trying to give them the best environment so that they can live through the winter and get planted in the springtime. Another reason to dig them is because you want to divide the tubers, and this one little clump turns from one plant into, well, maybe 10 plants. So that's kind of fun when you get to multiply your garden. We dig ours now because this is basically when everything's dying back, and it's before it gets super cold here in the Pacific Northwest. So once they get dug, they get washed off, and then they're sitting out here in our garage, which is not a heated garage. It probably stays, 40 degrees at night?
50.
50?
It's cool in here.
It's cool. It's not warm, but it's also not freezing. So you want these tuber clumps that you have washed off, you want them to have a chance to dry off before you put them in storage, because there's this balance that you're going for. You're trying to ensure that they don't dry out, but you're also needing to ensure that they aren't trapped in the bins with too much moisture. Both of those things are not good for the tubers, drying out and being too moist. Okay, so you have dug your dahlia. You made sure that it was washed off. It doesn't have big clumps of dirt stuck on it. You've let it dry so that it's not wet going into storage. Then what you're going to do is you are going, and here's a real small dahlia clump. This was a brand new dahlia this year. You're going to cut off that stalk. So this big hardy stalk, you want to cut it off. Let me show you a bigger one. Okay. You want to cut that stalk off so it looks like this. Sometimes, once the dahlia gets cut down, you've cut off all of that stuff. Like Aaron got all of them cut down one day, then it rained, and there can be moisture inside those stalks, and you don't want to store your dahlia with moisture stuck against it. So cut the stalk off.
All right, so once we take our dahlia tubers out of the ground,
Ooh, that was good. Did you see that water that came out? That is why you cut the stalk off.
So we cut them all down really quick, got rid of all the stuff at once, and then we dug them up. And then we bring them in here, they're all clean. And then because we're putting them in bins, trying to consolidate them, I go ahead and clip off all of the little root things. It is a bit neurotic. Can become a bit neurotic, but basically I'm just trying to clean this up so it can fit in the container, and I'm gonna wait until the spring to divide them. But I cut the stalk off as well, right here, just right down to where you kind of have a solid thing here without a hole where it can rot. And then once it's all cleaned up, I make sure it's labeled, and then it goes into the bin. All right, there's a bunch of ways you can store your dahlias. For us, we've used plastic bins, and we use pine chips, the finest pine chips that you can get from your local garden store. And we take our tubers and we lay them into, we put about 1 inch of pine chips in the bottom, and then we lay down a layer of tubers, making sure that they're not touching each other. It just helps to keep them from rotting. And then we take pine chips and we cover them. So you're just making sure they're covered, and this keeps them from drying out and keeps them from getting too moist. They kind of want to be stored in a specific humidity. And so once they're covered over, then we'll do another layer on top of those.
A layer of tubers.
Yeah, a layer of tubers. So what we use from our local Tractor Supply store is just the premium pine shavings. These are the fine ones. They look different from year to year, but these ones seem to be a little more coarse than last year. But you just want a fine medium. You can use some of the other mediums that are available. Peat moss, I think it's perlite is the other one.
Vermiculite?
Vermiculite. But for us, this is what works the best for storing everything in a big bin. And then after we have that layer, this one's not cleaned up, but basically you want to create separation, and then the next layer would go on, and we kind of layer that, and we build our way up like a lasagna in the bins. And then they get stored in our garage where it's cool and not too dry and not too moist. And that can be different at the spot for everybody. It's kind of like where you find where it's going. So here's what it looks like coming out of the ground before we clean it up. I mean, it's after it's been sprayed off, but before we snip. And then here's what it looks like when it's done. For us, we clean it up pretty good so that it can all fit in these bins. You don't have to if you have space and you don't have that many dahlias, so you don't need to be as neurotic as maybe I have been. But once they go in there, they're gonna sit in there until the spring, and then we're gonna pull them out in the spring and we're gonna divide them.
Couple final thoughts for you. We like to use these really fine snips to cut off all of those little all these little hairy parts. Again, you don't have to. We do that so we have good storage. And then we use the big clippers because some of these stalks are really beefy. And so you're going to need some big clippers to get through that whole big woody stalk. It's amazing how much the dahlia grows in one season. these huge clumps, like this one, this big, massive clump started from just one little tuber this year. What we put in the ground was one tuber, and that grew into this huge clump. So even for no other reason, you should dig your tubers up because it's fascinating. We're switching to the next tuber, and just to be super safe and careful, we dip our tubers in, it's like a little solution of rubbing alcohol, just to clean off the snips and ensure that we're not, like, let's say one of the tubers had some kind of disease, we don't want to accidentally spread that to the other ones. So for safe measures, we're dipping it in alcohol, or you can do a bleach solution. And that's what we're doing now with our dahlias. In March, we will be dividing them, so we'll be sure to show you how we do that then. If you don't have a lot of tubers, you could divide yours now, but they're fine staying together too. This is really a preference and what you have time for. So if you're deciding where to store your dahlias through the winter, think of a place that would be like an unheated garage. You want a space that stays dry, stays cool, is not damp, but it's also not going to be super like hot and drying it all out. One year I stored our tubers in our shed, and that was a great idea until it started to get warm again in the springtime, and they completely shriveled up. Another year, I stored them in our cellar, and the cellar amazingly stays way warmer than our garage, and I had a lot of rot in them. So this is a little bit of a trial and error, but find the space that would be the closest to an unheated garage. And we have our bins, they're filling up. So we're going to store our tubers. Most likely they will take up these shelves, and then we have some other shelving in the back that they can go on. But they're gonna sit here and they're going to stay cozy, dry, not frozen until we can divide them in March. And the way that we label ours, everybody has a different system. You need to find what works best for you. But we actually write directly on to like one of the sturdiest tubers, and the name goes directly on there so that we don't have to worry about a tag coming off and getting lost. We like to label ours because when we divide them, we only have so much space in our garden. And so anything that doesn't fit in our own cutting garden, we will post. I think they'll be available online in April. We will post whatever we have extra of will be available for sale.